All right, it's right on 12 o'clock, and we've got quite a number of people here who's popped into the Zoom conference. I really appreciate those who are attending today. For those who don't know who I am, my name's Merv Fernando. I am the Managing Director of both 100% Aboriginal-owned businesses, Claystone Marketing, and Indigenous Medical Supplies. Today is a special conference, a special day to be celebrating 30-year anniversary of NIBEC. I would like to honour the founding Indigenous businesses that came together 30 years ago. That was just about when I was about 4 years old.
That makes us feel old.
So a little bit about me. I have a business degree with La Trobe University, in which I studied a few years back. I graduated in 2017. I then went on and I did a master's in marketing. And then from there, I just had the need to really start something of my own, in which I've launched Claystone Marketing and Indigenous Medical Supplies. I've been heavily invested and passionate about working within the Aboriginal business space, supporting Aboriginal businesses across the country with websites, logos, anything that they need to really get started and get going as a startup business. So that's the sort of stuff I've been doing, as well as working.
Whereabouts are you based, Merv?
Based on Yorta country down here in Shepparton. So I would like to acknowledge those whose land that I'm on, and also pay my respect to all of the different nations on whose land we're on this morning. So yeah, Claystone Marketing Indigenous Medical Supplies really immersed itself within the Indigenous business space, as well as working with Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations in the medical space, working with health programs, as well as delivering much needed critical medical supplies. And for those who know a little bit about Indigenous medical supplies, would have seen that we've been very active in supporting ACCHOs with COVID-19 and personal protective equipment supplies. So I guess I would say I'm not just an entrepreneur, I'm also extremely passionate about working within that space, helping mob in any way possible, particularly on the health side. So that's a little bit about me. I am a young family man. I have 2 children, to a beautiful woman who I'm going to marry in December. So I'm a couple of months away from that. She's from Gunai Kurnai, so she's a Victorian. I'm from New South Wales. I'm Gamilaroi as well as Dungari. Claystone Marketing and Indigenous Medical Supplies are both Kinaway certified Aboriginal businesses, as well as New South Wales Chamber of Commerce, as well as Supply Nation certified Indigenous businesses. And as I mentioned, we're 100% Aboriginal owned. I don't want to really take too much away from what we're about to speak about today. I know I've just given you the intro about me. I'm really keen to learn much more about the historical conference that had taken place 30 years ago, as I hand it now on over to Colin and Rod to take us in to really just bring us back and to talk about the NIBEC conference back 30 years ago. So Cole, do you want to take it from here?
Thanks, Merv. And I'd just like to acknowledge the Quandamooka people. I live on Canapia Island, which is just off Brisbane, and I've been living here for about 3 months after working in Aboriginal communities all over Australia and Papua New Guinea for the last 50 years. From my early days working in Papua New Guinea in the 70s, I worked a lot in tourism, and then in the 1980s I moved back to Australia, where I worked in Cairns and worked in the Torres Strait. In the Torres Strait in 1989, I was a media advisor and political advisor, not that they needed any advice, to Gatana Louie and George Meyer in the early days of ATSIC. So I was very heavily involved in the development of ATSIC. From there, in the 1990s, my interest moved to Central Australia, where I took up various positions, but basically as a media advisor to the late Charlie Perkins. And after discussions with Charlie over a couple of years, from about 1991 to 92, we decided that his strong interest was in economic development. And I said to Charlie, why don't we hold the first ever conference in those days? It was 40,000 years, but now it's 65,000 years. And so the concept of the whole NIBEC arose out of Charlie's passion. Now, if anyone's interested in Charlie's speech that he delivered at that particular conference, it is linked on our website, which we're developing to really cover the history of businesses. It's really interesting to look at the documentation. We had the first national and state and territorial business awards in those days as well, and it's very interesting to see how many of those businesses have survived. For instance, in the tourism area that both Rod and I have been very interested in, if you look at the 1990s, there was three very large Aboriginal businesses, and that was Jabberkai in Cairns, Unangood Tours, and the Aboriginal Art and Culture Centre. For various reasons, those three businesses don't exist. People like Margaret Campbell, I understand, is still going, and there's a number of other businesses that have survived over those years. So that's basically my background and my involvement with Charlie Perkins on the whole project. Fortunately, when we started out, we had the support of Rod and Graham Atkinson, who can't be with us today because he's tied up in a project in Victoria. But that's how NIBEC got started. So I'll pass across to Rod. If anyone wants to see Rod's CV, we've also put it up on our page. So Rod, I'll handball over to you to give the keynote delivery about your involvement in NIBEC.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. While you said that there's some stuff on the webpage, is there also the report? Otherwise,
yes, there is.
Thank you.
On that page, there's two. I put extracts of the report, plus Merv's just about to put up Rod's major paper that was written about NIBEC as well. So there's two on, and it's, if you go to Claystone Marketing Historical under Resources, that's where we're going to be putting up a lot of historical Aboriginal business information and to share, and hopefully this group that we've put together now we can talk about the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander business over the last 30 or 40 years of operations. So I won't cut across Rod. So Rod, would you like to proceed?
Thanks, Colin. Look, I'd like to pay my respects to the Turrumbul people. I'm based up here outside of Brisbane, in the suburbs of Brisbane, and currently doing my PhD at University of Queensland. And what I'm doing with my PhD is I'm writing up the business model that I developed over the 30 years I've been in business, and testing it out on the ground. So I'm doing my PhD on it. But I thought it was good to, after 30 years, do a presentation at the AADSIS conference in Perth about my thoughts about the business history in NIBEC and how I got involved. I'm not sure how I changed the pages here, Merv.
So if you just go, see where you got slideshow up in the main header?
Yep.
So click slideshow.
Is it right up top, is it?
Yep. So next to animations, to the right.
Oh, right.
And there should be a drop-down menu where you can go full screen.
Sorry about this, my technology skills.
You're right, brother. So it's just in that.
Or if it's easy, you can just point your cursor on your ones on the left-hand side where it's got 1, 2, 3, 4. And click on like number 2. But Merv is right about translating it to a full screen view.
Right. It's got some buttons down the bottom, so there might be the full screen view.
Sorry, right
Yep.
up the top.
Yeah, I've
Okay.
done it, I think. Yep. Yeah, so how I got involved with NIBEC was I ended up organising a sponsorship for my company because I'd only started my business in February and this conference was on. And I arrived at the airport and got into Alice Springs, and I was met by Charlie and Colin to say, Rod, could you manage this conference? And I said, yes. And I said, well, who are my facilitators? And they said, we haven't organised any yet. So I looked at the list. We looked at the list and we had people there that had 20 years of tourism or 20 years in agriculture or whatever. And so what we did was we put those people as the chairs of the different sessions because all the sessions were set out. And then we looked at the list and we saw a number of university students or pretty skilled public servants. And so they become the scribes of the workshops. And at the end of the day, each of those scribes and chairs of those workshops had to argue with me about whether their points were good enough to go up on my whiteboard. And so over 2 to 3 days, I had 3 whiteboards full of all this information. And that's what this strategy that I'm about to talk to came out of. So it come from people who were in business, people wanting to go into business, and people had an interest in the business stuff. So it really come from us, this strategy that we developed over those days. And as you can see,
I might just point out that we do have a cultural warning on our site too, because a lot of the people have passed on.
Yeah.
Like in that thing, we've got the tracker Toolmouth, we've got Charlie and the legendary Max Stewart there.
Yeah,
and
Max Stewart.
That's Rod in the centre with hair.
Yeah.
And dark hair.
And so, yeah, this was one of the photographs of it. So like I said, it's 30 years, and that was the same year I was following. And also, Colin, you mentioned ATSIC hadn't been around that long. So
about 3 years. I think ATSIC was introduced in 1990. There was an election in that 93 year as well.
Yeah, so it was early days for us. So there's Graham Atkinson and Ted Hampton. And it was hosted by the Arrernte Council and attended by over 350 delegates, and had a list of people who ranged from university students to people who had 20 years of experience in various industries.
I just might also mention we had a big trade display there too, set up at the Arrowluan Centre. We got all the students from around Central Australia and Northern Territory to visit it, and probably I think we had about 2,000 young students attend the trade conference. And having lived in Alice Springs off and on for 20 years, a lot of those people got inspired by it, ended up running their own businesses. So there was a lot of spin-offs from that particular trade show as well.
So from all that information that come in from the workshops, because I had this board of all these things, and I was thinking, God, I've got to give a speech tomorrow, and how am I going to break all this information down? But it broke into 3 areas: political structures, support structures, and financial structures. And one of the things people talked about was dispelling the myths about us not wanting to get into business, and that we get plenty of money for economic development, and that's and trying to find that balance between social and economic funding outcomes, because it was a lonely voice out there trying to talk business development those days. There weren't many of us. And at that time, Mabo had only been handed down, and we agreed that Mabo shouldn't dominate the conference agenda, but it is very significant and it's likely to make changes. So we're in the era of trying to think about how do we position ourselves as businesses with this Mabo, with the dismissal of Terry and Nullius, and that. So that was one of the major topics. So in support structures, people talked about Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, setting up a national Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander business and economic strategy, industry management support services, National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Business Register, Black Pages, business and economic units, utilisation of current organisation support structures, and the protection of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander assets. So in those, there are chambers of commerce that have been set up over the last 30 years, but we still haven't achieved a national one. National Aboriginal Organisation business strategies. There's no real clear one, that outlines the markets, money flows, economic bargaining power of our human and capital resources. Especially in industry, we do have stores programs, tourism management, pastoral management. These were all things that we wanted to happen, but not sure whether they've really happened. In relation to a register of Black Pages, I suppose Supply Nation and the various state chambers have their member registered. But I'm not sure whether there's one national register, but maybe Supply Nation qualifies as that.
I suppose Supply Nation is the closest, one single source where people can see qualified business, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses.
Then support new and start-up businesses. Indigenous Business Australia does that, state government, some bakes offer that service in relation to support. Utilisation of expertise from current organisations. This one's a difficult one to execute because of funding cuts and politics and whatever. But I suppose we thought on the day, well, we got our legal services, we've got different land councils. Maybe we can access those sort of resources to get our business development going. Protection of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, and they broke that down into our cultural values, our patents and copyright, and our economic assets to utilise our capital assets more effectively and remove restrictive legislation which prevents capital assets being used as assets, and educate our own people about economic value. And another issue that was raised was accessing finance, and access to mainstream banks and that. We need that, and that's still an issue today. The need for more joint venture arrangements between businesses and that. And those days they did have Peter Kittle Toyota, and there were some major joint ventures going on. And there's a lot more today, but not enough. And we talked about the black economy. And I suppose, we wanted government departments to at least give us 2% of their contracts to our businesses and that. And I suppose what's happened is Indigenous procurement policies have been developed in Commonwealth and state governments, and Supply Nation with a focus on 3% of government and private corporate spending. And then there was a follow-up conference in Brisbane in 1995. And there's Uncle Neville Bonner and Uncle Wenton Rabunja and Uncle Charlie Perkins. And they were still driving economic development, and me hiding in the corner. Like I said at the conference, it's important to know our history. And this photograph is taken down at a place called Byugal, which is a Yugal bus station, which is on outside of Grafton. And sitting over on the left is old fella, and that would be my great-great-great-grandfather's generation. And the caption on the photograph was "Old King, New King." And here he is riding into his big mansion. And that's what it looked like. And so our family helped him build that. And, they really worked off our backs no matter where they were in the country. Took our land and built their wealth. And like I said, I was born a ward of the state in Queensland because I was born before 67. Lives through the White Australia policy, lives through Terry Nullius. Australia's never signed a treaty. We're not recognised in the Constitution. That still stands today. So where do we fit? And that's the question I often ask. Now So I mentioned this in 1993, we were thinking about Mabo, a native title. In 2023, I think we have to start thinking about how do we position ourselves for treaty with our nation groups, the Indigenous estate we already own and control, and Commonwealth and state responsibilities. So the nation groups, I'm part of Gidabal, Bundjalung and Gumbaynggirr nations down on the southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. So how do we go about this negotiation of treaties when we're with all our nations? Because we all have to represent our nations. And how do our businesses position ourselves within those negotiations? This is part of my PhD. We've got this Indigenous estate where we control over 20%, 31% of the land mass. We have assets like land rights organisations, native title organisations, media organisations, social enterprises. It's absolutely huge, the asset base we have. We've got all this land. So we've got all these tangible assets, being land, water, and the resources within the fixed property. Intangible assets, such as our cultural and intellectual property rights. They exist, art, dance, music, language. And as my good friend Amanda said, Amanda used to often quote me in the Senate, in a bad way, of course, we do need to ask ourselves why, when Indigenous Australia theoretically controls such a large proportion of the Australian landmass, they themselves so poor, being land rich and dirt poor. This isn't good enough. We need to have to find ways to change that. And she said that in 2015. Well, nothing's changed, Amanda. And so central to our treaty negotiations, we have to take stock of our estate and how we improve our cultural, social, political, environmental and economic return on this huge tangible and intangible asset base. Now, when it comes to Commonwealth and state government responsibilities, when we go to the table to negotiate with these state and Commonwealth and territory, we need to think about what their responsibilities are. So on the Commonwealth side, there's defence, foreign affairs, trade, commerce, currency, immigration, air travel, telecommunications, broadcasting, Indigenous affairs, social services and pensions, and taxes, including income tax and federal goods and tax. On the state side, we've got schools, hospitals, conservation, environment, roads. So there's a whole range of state issues, and the areas where they share powers is in education, health, and water management. So, you know, when we develop our strategies, because, you know, the Commonwealth has these areas, and those responsibilities are there for the state. So we have to be strategic when we come to those negotiations, and we need to formulate those nation groups, consider the Indigenous estate, and also take into account Commonwealth and state responsibilities. I'll just go back. In relation to this, when I travelled overseas, you know, there were a mob in the US that had been handed back old Air Force bases and that. And you go to Canada, and I went to visit this big insurance company up in Saskatchewan. And I said, "Oh, is this head office?" And they said, "No, head office is not here in the city. It's out on our land, because we get tax benefits if we have our business located on our tribal lands." So these are the things I think we have to think through when we go to the negotiation table. What are the things that have been achieved overseas? Can we negotiate some of those things in our own right here in Australia? And how do we position ourselves as businesses? So I just quickly went through that so we could just have a chat. Colin, back to you, or Merv.
Okay. Well, I think, you know, as a result of last Saturday's referendum no vote, a lot of the state governments now and territory governments are getting very nervous about proceeding with what did you describe it before? What is the 3 T's?
I sort of thought about this even before the vote, and it was consolidated after the vote. Was I'm over the R's, which is reconciliation and referendum, and I'm now into the T's: treaty, truth, and trouble.
So I noticed today the Queensland opposition leader has reversed his support of treaties, and obviously the federal government is gone into a period of reflection also on treaties and the Makarrata truth telling as well. So they're issues that are going to be fairly ongoing. So do you want to take questions, Rod?
Yeah.
So we might open
discussion
to,
anyway.
Some of the delegates,
because
if you want to put a question, please. There we go. We've got quite a few people there. So if you want to ask Rod a question, please put your hand up and open your audio. Any questions there? Comments?
Rod, I have one question.
Yep.
Where do I go to find some of your paper, some of your works?
You'll find them on my website, goingan.com.au, and I've got a section there called articles, and all the different articles I've written over the years, I've put them up there. But I'm happy to have them also placed on your new business, workshop.
We've got a couple that we're just going to be putting up this afternoon, Rod.
Yeah, and I've got a range of articles that I've written over the years, because there's some significant ones I've been to, like when they had the 20 years land rights celebrations in Canberra for the NT Land Rights Act. I was the only mining guy invited to speak at it, even though I'd just finished with the mining industry. But I thought that was great that I'd worked in the mining industry, and the land councils still thought highly of me after that time. Has anyone got questions?
Oh, it